Good evening, everybody. Billy O here with another episode of Huns History. When Ansel and I started 3 or 4 weeks ago, the Huns History Project, the first installment was a back and forth conversation about our intent with this project, and also to talk a bit about Pat Lockridge. I was so inspired recently by Poot and Dave Zach with their interviews and their pictures and talking about so many Huns characters that I want to try and do a little bit more of that with the Huns of the 70s and the early 80s. So here we go. I'm going to see if I can figure out how to share my screen, and we're going to go from there. Cool. This is a team, fall 78, fall 79, somewhere in there. Around December of 76 or the spring of 77, Pat Lockridge and all his guys had graduated from grad school and law school and moved away. So the Huns for a while were like 10 guys, maybe 12 guys, all sophomores, maybe juniors in college, all beginners to the game of rugby, a little undersized. We didn't have a coach. And we started rebuilding. And as I said in my interview before, about a year before this picture, so in 77 or 78, we had put some guys together and learned the game, and we had a great day. We beat the Houston Heathens, which were an all-star team out of Houston, of course. For years, there were the old boys in the Houston Rugby Club down there, and a guy named Richie Parker wanted better players and maybe a better coach. So he poached players from both teams and formed the Heathens. They were an all-star team, and they beat the hell out of everybody. So beating them that fall or early spring was a huge accomplishment and probably the best win of my career. Dallas at the time was nominated by the Reds and the Quins, and Central Counties was dominated by the Blacks. Everybody played D1, so there was Tier 1, all those teams. And then there was everybody else. You know, the Huns and Fort Worth and A&M and San Antonio were sort of Tier 2, and teams like Corpus and Galveston and a few others were basically Tier 3. So the Huns were a solid middle-of-the-pack team. We would put together one win a season against one of those sides, and over the course of 7 or so years, pretty much beat all of them once. These tournaments, this was the Houston tournament, so it's November of 78 or 79, were invitational. And so in addition to those teams that I just mentioned, the Albuquerque Aardvarks would come, the Denver Barbarians would come, typically a team from the Midwest, like from Kansas City would come, a team from New Orleans would come. And you would literally have 8 to 10 incredible top flight teams. And these invitational tournaments were bigger even than the Texas Championships. So this team won the consolation bracket. Typically, the Blacks in the Austin tournament in the spring and Houston in the fall would always seed us against the number 1 team. So we would lose the first game at 8 a.m. on Saturday morning and then play in the consolation bracket. Typically, we did pretty well. We made it to the finals a lot. This weekend, we put it together and won, and it was the first piece of hardware when I played that we ever won for the Huns. It was a plaque, consolation bracket. They called it leather balls, and hopefully that's in the trophy case somewhere. And a great group of characters here. Second from the left is Hall of Famer Jay Rudd. He started right before, a few months before this tournament, and immediately our front row got better just because of the solid athlete that he was. The guy was a bricklayer, and he played rugby like it. This guy here, Phil Canole, was an All-American wrestler, and he also played lacrosse in Hobart. He was an engineering grad student, I think. And after his Huns career, he went on to be an admiral in the Navy, and he has since retired from the Navy and is traveling the world. We picked up 3 guys to round out the side. So we only traveled with like 12 or 13 guys, and we still won the consolation bracket. Remember, no subs in those days, really. And so we had a very thin roster. Here, third from the right, is Jack Martin, probably one of my best friends on the Huns to this day. I met him in the spring of '76, literally my fourth or fifth month on the club. Down here in the bottom left with the great hairdo and the porn star mustache is Jerry Acuna. Jerry, his knees had not failed him yet. He was very fast, a tough, if not always legal tackler, and he was an anchor in our back line. Over here are three of my favorite Huns of all time. This is Steve Corbett, a hard tackling fly half. He played fly half on this day and fullback. Also a Rolling Stones aficionado, except for Rolling Stones and David Bowie albums. I don't know that he had any music, that he had any other vinyl. Over here is Wes Wiley, a very thin, but his name suited him. He was a Wiley scrum half, very thin, but good feet. And he would probably have one of the best show and goes that you would ever see at scrum half. This is the legendary John Burns. I've heard a lot of guys from the 90s talk about Graham Watson and Thierry Dubois, that they could break, they could run, they could do pop-over kicks that would have a friendly bounce so they could gather it back up and run in for a try. John was all that too. He was also an incredible tackler. And even though he was a little guy, he could play in the centers, he could play on the wing, and he was a very smooth runner. And any game that we played with John, we had a chance to win. And quite frankly, all those D1 type wins that I talked about, the only reason we were in those games in the back line, no offense to anybody else, was because of John Burns' skill. The guy clowning around in the cowboy hat down at the bottom is yours truly. I made lifelong friends those first couple of years on the Huns. And here we are maybe a year before that tournament picture, John Burns on the left, Jack Martin in the middle, and myself proving that I once had hair on the right. I'm maybe 19 years old in that picture. Here we are again 30 years, 35 years later at Dave Anderson's wedding. Same order, John, Jack, and myself. We'd had a couple that night. We're having a good time. Dave's getting married and he's still laughing about it. If Dave had played with us for more than a couple of years, he probably would be a Hall of Fame candidate too. As John Burns said at his Hall of Fame induction speech, Dave might have been the hardest tackler in that era, and that was saying something. But lifelong friends, we're still in touch. They all came to the Hall of Fame banquet. We're still in touch to this day, and I'd do anything for these guys. This is probably my favorite all-time Huns picture, any era. It's our playoff bus trip to Shreveport. The bus driver here, we rented a University of Texas shuttle bus, couldn't spell. So he spelled Shreveport on a piece of cardboard and stuck it up in the window. We rented the bus for the weekend. He was a fun guy. He was an honorary Hun from day one. And a lot of legends in this picture. This is a young Rick Russell at the top. This is Wayne Lumpy March, who was a good prop, mostly a substitute because of Jay Rudd and Terry Adams. But legendary at the parties, Harris Curry, who went on to be a scientist in Austin and is a Hun social member. James Elston was a great scrum half, very obnoxious, like scrum halves can be, mouthy a bit. Poot says he's the dirtiest Huns player ever. I don't know about that, but that's what Poot said. This is David Acuna, a little younger than Jerry, but we had a couple of Acunas in the back line that day. David Pelton, who a year or two before started with the Huns at 109 pounds, soaking wet, put on some weight, started becoming a player. I think he was a sub on this day. I can't remember for sure. But David went on to be a great organizer for the Huns, integral in managing the team, being treasurer, getting our sevens program started. He, with James Elson and Kirk Tate, also helped form the University of Texas Rugby Club. Yours truly, of course, holding a beer. By this time, Jack Bloom has started with the club. He may have been with us a year or so in '83. I don't remember exactly. Wearing the fire helmet, holding the Playboy and a beer. Terry Adams had been with us a few months, maybe a year by this time. And as Jay Rudd had anchored the tight head side, Terry Adams anchored the loose head side. And you know what? all of a sudden our scrum really made a difference. And we dominated the run of play on this day. We scored 3 tries, if I remember correctly. They scored none. They had a fly half that could punt the ball a mile and kick for posts from very far out. And so he kept us pinned in our end a lot and scored all their points with penalty kicks. And even with that, we had a chance to win at the end. One of our wings ran into contact and instead of passing, knocked on, and those things happen. But we were the better team, in my opinion, on the day. Kevin Beadle, father of our current scrum half, Grant Beadle. Kevin was a smooth fly half, really good player. John Banks, you've heard some of the other guys in interviews talk about Johnny Banks. Johnny played a lot of different positions and was also a real club guy, gave a lot of support to new players, helped guys out that were in financial trouble, and was the life of the party. Third testicle, showing up naked at bars for the after-game social. John was always good for getting the whole group into trouble. Don Chandler, who got interviewed a couple weeks ago and played on both sets of playoff teams in the 80s and 90s in the front row as a hooker with Jay Rudd and Jerry Adams, had joined the team. He was also a really good lineout thrower. Here's Jerry again, fixing his hair, still has that same kind of, you don't want your daughter to date this guy mustache. Jerry's knees were still good. He anchored us in the back line for a lot of years. John Redhorse, a great player, could play scrum half and fly half and also really understood the game. Doug Harlow, a swimmer, I think at UT before he played rugby. Really good second row. Peter Walsh, incredible reprobate from England. No G-rated Peter Walsh stories, though there is a really good X-rated, R-rated Peter Walsh story from this trip that if anybody wants to text me, I'll tell you about. Jay Rudd, again, was the anchor of our scrum. After the loss, he also led us out on a recon mission. We stole the legendary Stoner Drive street sign. No one knows where it is to this day, but we stole it and brought it home. Jay, I think the statute of limitations has run out on that, so we're good. This is Vinnie Mamone, another 109-pound guy that played wing. I think he was a substitute on this trip. Vinnie, you may have noticed in some of the pictures I've posted on the Huns pages recently, he and his wife have an animal rescue business. It's got pictures of him in his Huns polo holding a hawk or an eagle, I can't remember which one, and feeding a deer a Shiner beer. So, Vinnie, well done. This is a couple weeks later at that Austin tournament. I show this because there's our front row anchors of Terry Adams and Jay Rudd, and there is a young Rick Russell, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody can recognize me in the back because, of course, I'm talking. You know, all those years ago are great, but this is also one of my favorite Huns pictures of all time. This is our second Old Timers Day a year and a half ago, unfortunately, which was combined with Mike Martin's memorial service. But it's really great to see all the players, all the old boys come together. And this is about twice the turnout of the prior year. The Reds beat us that day, but we played a lot better. We improved year over year, setting up this last run we had before COVID shut us down. And I just love seeing all these guys together. And at that Old Timers Day was another kind of before and after picture of some lifelong buddies. You got Jack Martin again on the far left. I stay with Jack and Liza, his wife, to this day when I come to Austin, lifelong friends. In the middle is Jeff Riddle. He was my freshman college roommate, and I talked him into coming out for the Huns, and he played fall and of 75 and spring of 76, and then a little bit in the fall of 77, and then he got serious about his studies. And again, this is me on the side. No hair now. I did have some hair then. This is a fall tournament. It might have been when we went to the tournament in Hammond, Louisiana in 76 or 77. I can't really remember, but we're at a tournament somewhere in the fall and just, you know, having a hell of a time and being brothers. You know, that's it. I'm really happy with how these Huns history things are going. It's been delightful to hear all these guys talk about some of the guys they played with. Carl Dahlberg, Don Chandler, Dave Zach, all did incredible jobs. So did Captain Boot. And we got some great interviews lined up. Jack Bloom, Jay Rudd. I'm going to try and get Jerry Acuna on a computer somehow. We got some things coming up, and I appreciate the interviews Hansel is doing too. So I hope you enjoyed this. Stay tuned, and go Huns!